you recently, on the Weekly Standard, which you edit, you recently wrote an editorial on the left's attitude towards the economy, towards jobs. You called it Keynes and Marx. Marx is the old left for you, Keynes is the new left for you, and you contrasted the Keynesian view of that work is not a good in itself, it's a means to an end, with your conservative view. And I thought this was a really interesting way of trying to understand conservatism, or a particular type of conservatism. You start with the famous quote of the young Marx about being, I can't remember what it is, a hunter in the morning, a social critic in the afternoon, in the evening, etc. Not being constrained by what society forces you and defines you to be. Can you briefly tell us what you think the alternative, what for the conservative is the alternative of the good life? That for Marxists, for people on the left, that is the definition of self-realization. It's the ideal. You offer a different ideal in that article.
Yeah, the left's ideal is a false ideal. It can't be attained, and tens of millions of people have been killed in the attempt to attain such a utopia. The conservative view is that life doesn't change as much, no matter how much economic progress there is. There are constraints, there are limits, and obviously there are many good ways to live lives within those limits. Some people find religion is the best kind of expression of those limits. Others find a more natural ground for understanding what's an admirable life and what's not. But I think the conservative view is that we're not going to end up in a world without nations, without borders, without limitations, without constraints, without necessities, which deep down is in some way the left's ideal.
Right. I take that and I accept entirely that there's certainly in Marx, in a very traditional sense of view of Marx, there is the promise of bounty, that we will live in a bountiful world, and that of course eliminates a whole lot of problems which actually sensible people should deal with. But can I quote you directly from that article? Because I think there's something, you do something brilliant in it, which is you say for conservatives, it's jobs in the day, tea parties after dinner, with hunting and church and patriotic parades on the weekends. Now, this echoes Marx's view, which is, well, it's various jobs during the day, and then it's discussion in the evening, but you choose to do that. Now, the bit that you add, which in a sense really isn't in Marx, is church and patriotic parades.
Yeah, I think you may be overinterpreting a somewhat ironic and wry comment of mine, but yes, I don't think we're going to get to a world beyond religion, nor do I think we should. I don't think we're going to get to a world beyond the nation state, nor do I think we should. And I think the left, seeks such a world, most of the left, not every single person. I mean, obviously the editorial paints in broad brushes, but I actually think the more one looks at politics today, one does see a conflict of two different sort of fundamental views of where we can go and where we should go. Is patriotism an unfortunate relic of the past, something to be sought to be got beyond? Should one be a cosmopolitan above being a lover of one's own country? Obviously one should be some of both, but should one also be a patriot, or is certain kinds of patriotism at least very admirable? So this was just, I was alluding to these deeper debates. I obviously didn't explain them in 800 words, but I'm glad you found them so interesting.
I thought it was very interesting. You talk about the bounded nature of the world we live in and the left's mistake over boundlessness. How does that, for you, play into questions about environmental limits?
Well, I think a sensible conservationism is part of a sensible conservatism. On the other hand, a massive global attempt to regulate the entire planet in a way that I think won't work in any case because of climate change that may or may not end up being damaging to human beings, and I think that's not, there is climate change, but how damaging or whether it's damaging is very unclear. And at the expense of economic growth, which remains a good thing for hundreds of millions, I guess billions of people around the world, a necessary thing. I'm very skeptical about. But no, an understanding of limits is important. And in that respect, I think we owe a debt to the environmental movement. There was a kind of craziness about earlier 20th century views of economic progress and material progress, unbounded and unlimited by any other goods. And to the degree that people believed that, it was obviously most sensible people never quite believed that. No, I think it makes sense to be a conservationist.
And do you think that there might be actually a real dilemma appearing because of environmental limits in the following sense? That I think, as you say, and I'm sure as many people agree, there is something intrinsically good about work, about achievement, about building towards things. And when people are left to do that, what you get is growth, economic growth. Now, so that social good, the social goods that come from a life of work, produce as a side effect, almost, economic growth. Is there if it were the case that there were limits, environmental limits to that, would there have to be some trade-off then between the social and the environmental good?
Well, sure, there are always trade-offs. On the other hand, economic growth has been good for the environment, not bad. London was much more polluted 200 years ago than it is today. Horses pollute much more than cars. Water, sewage water in the street is much filthier than even the effects of bad oil spills. So I think it's perfectly easy to reconcile. Not perfectly easy. It's what politicians do. It's what policymakers do. It's not that hard to reconcile economic growth and sensible environmentalism.
So on climate change, if it were to turn out that climate change, that if we all became convinced of the science, then would you see...
No, what's the science? That the climate is changing, or that it will do huge damage to human beings? The climate has changed a lot. The Thames froze in the 16th century.
No. Okay.
Are we terribly worse off? We're much warmer than we were
absolutely. Sorry.
You people on the left, if I could just speak, isn't it? I think it was asked. I was asked to have.
No, go on. That's fine.
You've spoken, very eloquently. You people on the left, and I could just say a word.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. You people on the left should learn to like change. You shouldn't be scared of change. What's a little climate change? Everyone's, ooh, climate change, oh my God, shut down the economy, shut down the oil rigs, shut down the coal mines. So you can try. I don't think most people would like it. I don't think people in India and China would say, that's great, great. Let's go back to that nice environmental situation we had in Calcutta in 1872 or in 1955. Is that the moral position of the left now?
No, I'm absolutely with you. That my question is, if we were to find that there was a limit, your position.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Your position.
I don't need a lecture from you. The answer is yes. If there are limits, I will accept the limits.
But the limit, if the limits are of the sorts that the climate change movement suggests, would they be? They seem to feed into the requirement for non-local solutions, non-national solutions.
Do we have something called the World Health Organization? How long has that existed?
Since 1945.
No, before. There was a precursor. It existed many years before that. Have we dealt with diseases that cross borders? Have nation states been able to do that? Have peoples been able to do that? Of course we have to deal with transnational issues. America and Canada, Britain and neighbors have dealt with transnational environmental issues for a long time. This doesn't require global governance. It requires sensible negotiations among countries to deal with these problems. It doesn't require a transformation of our understanding, though, I don't think, of either domestic politics or international politics. And I do object to the climate change movement insofar as they want to make a huge jump from there are certain issues we have to cooperate on, which I certainly agree with, to we need to somehow give up, domestic decision making and immediately trust a bunch of unelected experts in Brussels or somewhere like that. But obviously a lot depends on the facts. It's not as you say, it depends what the limits are and how they can be dealt with and addressed, and whether there are technological solutions or whether there are other kinds of solutions to different aspects of climate change. Presumably climate change in some places, warming in some places would be healthy for the people. There are places where people have frozen to death, and warming in other places could be obviously damaging.